Yeah.
Love Colour Spin, Moby Dixon, it gets no better than that.
It's always good when you know the whole song.
Yes, indeed.
And all the people that were on the song. And the people who made the song.
Well, maybe you should tell these people because they might not know.
Yeah, you did that.
But let's start here.
Cool.
Evening, everybody. I'm Dams. People call me the mystery one. This is Lazarusman, all the way from South Africa.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be looking at South African Deep House. For those that don't know, it's a little bit, well, it's a lot different to what we know as Deep House here. Laz is going to walk us through the evolution of Deep House, South African Deep House, through his eyes. We'll look at where the music began, and we'll end up with where it's going in the future. So it won't only be house music you'll hear today. You'll hear a little Kwaito. You might hear some European Deep House. You might hear a bit of Laz if he's gracious today. But you will definitely hear some great music, and I hope you enjoy. I'll hand you over to Lazarus.
Hey. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Oh, yeah. No, cool. I think I have too much of a voice, so I don't need that much volume. So this is kind of cool being here. For those who don't know, I'm the Lazarusman, Lazarusman Tebula by name. I kind of just didn't bother finding a proper pseudonym. I just used my name as that. It's kind of weird. Every time I go to shows, people ask me what my real name is, and when I go Lazarus, they go, "Oh, okay, it's pretty boring. We thought you were more inventive than that, you know." I'm a poet by trade. I started out in poetry. That was my first love. I wrote poetry in high school. I wrote it in primary school. Right into my adult years, I competed in poetry slams. I was connected to cafes, theaters. But I think I did poetry to a point where I kind of reached the ceiling in South Africa. And it was a bit of a kind of a wake-up moment when I realized that there were no poets in convertibles with like girls and flashing money at the back. I was like, no one is necessarily blowing up with poetry. No one's traveling the world, you know. We're not necessarily. So I think that created a different kind of itch. Where else could I take it? And the interesting with poetry is that poetry is not devoid of music, because as much as I can sit here, I love speaking about poetry because that was the chat, but through poetry you are listening to a lot of music, and I think the transition into dance music was inspired by music that I was already listening to. And I think today one of the bigger things I want to sort of look into is taking you on this little journey from a perspective of where I grew up, how I grew up, the influences and watching the world around me define some of the genres that you guys know and love today. I come from the East Rand in Johannesburg, and the East Rand is a popular hood. I think outside of Soweto, which is world famous, the East Rand is probably the hood in terms of that. And the East Rand is made up of a couple of different townships, and each of these townships have an equal measure of a claim to fame. Tembisa, Vosloorus, Katlehong, Spruitview. I don't know if I'm leaving one out, but all of these hoods had some sort of musical background brewing in them. For example, Tembisa produced a lot of really great producers. Shims is actually from Tembisa, and there were a lot of other artists. I think DJ Cleo. There were a few artists who stemmed from that particular part of the hood. And I was from the East, and what we were famous for in the East, we were famous for house and our rappers. We produced very good rappers and very good practitioners of house music. And so in that kind of process, the thing of house becoming a sort of big thing was this whole thing of street bashes, you know? Guys would get, I think these speakers are a bit small, but they would get like towering versions of these speakers with like 3 different like speakers attached to them. Attach that to like the smallest, least powerful amp you could find. And then just plug that in a street corner over someone's wall, run the cables through someone's mom's house, the moms away, but we're using that house either way, put that onto the street, and then close the street off, and that bash was always a 6 to 6. We went from 6 o'clock until 6 o'clock the next morning. And so that became the hotbed of the different styles and the genres of music that came about, and how I necessarily came into understanding what exactly dance music was. And the interesting thing about the process then was that the Eastern boys were also gatekeepers. They were okay with teaching you music, but it would take you a while before you could even touch the turntables. So what you had to do is, before you could even start DJing, you had to learn how to connect the sound system. You know, bring the amp, bring the speakers, what goes in where. And that's all that we did for like, I think a good number of like years. And then eventually when you could do it with your eyes closed, then they were like, okay, now you can put your USB in, you can put your CD in, then you can DJ. It's almost like martial arts in some ways, you know?
We call them box boys and girls.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a similar kind of vibe in that way. So, yeah, but I think I want to start the journey potentially by looking at music from the past and how that music influenced the music of today. And the first track I really want to start with, they're kind of naming this song as one of the first versions of maybe South Africa's first hip-hop track. It's from the 80s, Sipokumete, and you might recognize the beat in itself and where that might potentially come from, but I want to play this song and play a few more other songs that will get us to the point where we arrive at deep house and Afro house and all of these genres in South Africa.
I felt like we should be up rocking.
It's funny, no one had ever done that on a track before in the 80s, you know, where you just come on and you're not just rapping or delivering spoken word in English, you're doing it in your own language. And I think some of the lyrics also as well, like in the opening lyrics, he's just talking about starting his day. He's like, put your pants on, make sure your shoes are tied. And Chiga means to turn. So, and when we dance, basically there was that Kodeso, you know, where you turn and you do a step back. So the song is really inspired by that. But that song for me touches on so many things. It touches on the arrival of the synth-based music. It touches on groove. Bubblegum music was also a very big element. That's what we called it in South Africa because it was palatable, you know, it's easy to consume. So, and all the cool kids then, you know, all the artists when they used to come on shows like Jameli, someone's always chewing a gum, pop it, you know, so they became a sort of associated to that. So that song came out in the 80s and I think it really began to set the tone of where the music kind of like would go, because a lot of the genres that followed from that began to borrow those synths, those chords, those beats, those sounds. It wasn't just about I think this was probably, and I'm sure we all know the hip hop track that's inspired by, but what we actually started to do is adding these South African flavors. And as South Africans, we love that. We love to take a thing and make it our own thing and then twist it around, and it's suddenly not the thing that you thought it was. You know what I'm saying? We were discussing the other day, like it was the 2010 World Cup, and there was a TV program, and they were like, feel it, it's here. South Africans were like, feel it, can't say feel it fully, so they made it Philip, it's here. You know what I'm saying? And that became like the term from that. So we're always doing that. We're always like mixing stuff and putting it together in different ways and doing that. So that is the first kind of jam that kind of really set the tone for that. And I think a couple of years after that, these genres started to explode and come into like their own. And there's something that the Germans really like to talk about, and I want to speak about the relationship between the music from Germany and the music from South Africa. The Germans, you speak a lot about groove, this undertone, this consistent, persistent melody that keeps coming back in music. And we got that somehow. And these grooves started to become something that was prevalent in the music. And also groove is essentially what drove Deep House. And once you kind of understand groove, you start to hear it in everything. So when I was preparing for this, I began to revisit certain songs and started to match where you would find groove. And this next song is a sort of deep Kwaito track, but the groove in it, you can see where the inspiration and the elements of Deep House come from.
Just quickly, what is Kwaito? What is it? Where does it come from?
Kwaito was like a very sort of rebellious genre that came from guys not wanting to be distinctly jazz, distinctly hip-hop. Amapansula in the hood, which were, I think here they would call them roadmen. That would be that. So the Pansula guys really wanted a music that would define them, that defined their culture, the things that they did. So it was really a mashup of house, of jazz, of funk, all put into one thing. And I think, in my experience, Kwaito was actually almost what birthed the deep house that we know as South African deep house. Because if you took the lyrics away from the Kwaito songs, a lot of those songs would be heard in the club. For example, DJ Cleo produced for a lot of Kwaito artists, but when he started essentially putting out his productions with no lyrics on it, that was then perceived as house,
So we've got Kwaito, and we're around the end of apartheid now, right?
100%.
So this is resistance music.
It is resistance music.
So what are we resisting? Is it secret? Are we handing cassette tapes around?
Yeah. It's kind of weird because the resistance became televised, because the Kwaito guys went from being underground artists to suddenly becoming television stars. I think about Athamo Fokate's song, Abas Say No. That track, which was resisting the apartheid regime at the time, made it onto radio and made it onto TV and even had a music video. So these guys were really just elevating past that sound, and that sound was so palpable at the time that everybody wanted it. But they were also resisting their own systems, like the townships in terms of the areas that they lived in and how people wanted them to live in a certain way. They were like, we're going to do what we want. If we rob you, we rob you. If we don't rob you, it's fine. But we dance, we look a particular way, and you're going to have to just live with who we are, Yeah.
Let's play some music.
Yeah. You might have to give me your password here, so, in case I jack your phone later.
You got it.
Cool. I absolutely love the next song that I'm about to play you. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it when it's done. Yeah. And again, going back to the point of groove, those elements were also prevalent in Berlin techno at the time. You know, that slow mid-tempo undertone, and that somehow found its way to like South African townships in a very interesting way. Because as I said, if you strip the lyrics in that particular song, that music could be perceived as electronic music in its own kind of like vice. And it was fascinating to me that these guys were finding these elements that were at the time felt local but were global in terms of in terms of their soundscapes. Every time that song played, yeah, well, people would clean the streets of the dust, and not because they were working, it's just how hard they were stomping on the floor and raising like hell. Like, you couldn't see people around you because you had to like stamp your foot on the ground, because that kind of, and the interesting thing about that song, it's actually, the guy opens with telling people to not sell drugs or marijuana in God's house. Because if you do that, God will punish you with a fat slap. So the whole song is, he will slap you with a hot slap. Chisambama, walambama. So, and the simplicity of those lyrics are quite important, but they also speak about in terms of how you vibe out if, for example, that your life is always on edge. I'm going to follow that up with another track where, again, this element, this idea of groove is present. And it proliferates itself out here. And again, another stalwart, like South African classic. As Mandela's just free, the beer is affordable, everyone is like palpable. You can imagine when this song hits, people are ready.